really hard to know what does trust your emotions, what does even listening to your emotions mean.
I need this time where I'm just putting my head down.
Right.
To be all the time. So how do I do that? For a while, I would go in my closet and I'd work in the dark because it would just block out everything else.
That.
And I was like, wow, this is so cool.
I can just be a hermit in the dark and hate my life. It's like, I think in today's world, it can seem like in order for you to navigate the environment and make the best decisions, that you kind of have to be very in control of your emotions and use a lot of willpower, which I would say is probably pretty accurate, because we have so many things around us that are pulling us towards bad decisions.
Yeah.
But I think that at the same time, people can conflate being controlled by emotions is bad and then jump to emotions bad, right? And I think that that's kind of what can seem like, the easiest, more like extreme solution is just let me cut myself off from these emotions and instincts that are oftentimes, leading us in certain, directions that might be harmful in the long run.
Yeah, well,
right?
Maybe it's not the easiest. It's definitely the simplest of
right.
Emotions bad, just
right.
don't respond to your emotions.
Yeah.
That's simpler to understand and simpler to try and put into action than, well, these things are useful, these things might not be.
Right.
Sometimes I gotta figure it out,
right.
Yeah,
well, it's, as you said, it's simple, so it's obviously, it's just easier to try to understand.
Appealing.
Yeah. And it's also more appealing to certain kinds of temperaments, the kinds of temperament, the more from Myers-Briggs, the more thinking type. We don't really like that word because obviously everybody thinks and everybody feels, so it's kind of okay, this doesn't really make any sense, but more towards the conscious dominant people who like to think things through and more just rationally oriented.
So I say it's more appealing. It's not very appealing to me.
Yeah, but at the same time, so we kind of talked about my experience with, I guess you could say some degree of emotional suppression because it was kind of just prioritizing conscious, the conscious thinking and not very being very attuned with the subconscious and recognizing the value of that.
We talk about that in our
in the self-care podcast and a little bit in some other podcasts. But I think that it's very interesting to think about it from your perspective because we're opposite personality types. We're very different in pretty much every way, in terms of how we have a very similar sort of understanding and values, but then the way that plays out is in opposite ways, right?
Although some people might think that and be like, really? Because we're talking in a very similar manner, but I think we've also grown up together and built on each other and learned from each other. But in terms of our natural
inclinations, they're generally going in different directions.
They're going in usually opposite directions.
Yeah, and so because our family was very much prioritizing the sort of conscious framework of understanding and way of approaching life, because there's so many things out there hijacking our emotions that I think we do need to be able to approach things with intention, and that does come from the conscious, right? And not just I'm gonna go with the flow and all that sort of stuff, and then you get carried away by whatever's out there.
I mean, it's hard to trust your emotions because it's hard. Sometimes it's it's emotions and then there's emotional impulses.
Right.
And then so it's if you just decide to trust your emotions and eat a ton of cookies and binge watch shows all day in the name of trusting your emotions and doing what you feel like doing, then that's not a great place to be in.
Yeah.
So I think there is some thinking through things. It's not just trust your emotions or not.
Well, I think it's trust your emotions. What does that mean? Because you have emotions, but then you need to know how to interpret them. And I think what people can jump to is quickly labeling it either as bad or quickly labeling it as I should do this or quickly thinking about, oh, I have this emotion, therefore the implication is all these other things. And it's like,
that's
right.
fair. Yeah,
and
it's really hard to navigate.
So
that.
it's really hard to know, what does trust your emotions, what does even listening to your emotions mean, right? That's so confusing. And so I think that
For someone like me, if you say, if you tell me to trust my emotions, I'm gonna be like, yay!
Right.
I finally get to do all the things that I know I shouldn't do.
Right.
But Sume said to trust my emotions.
Right.
So I should just eat cookies
Right.
all day.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's kind of like, there's an aspect of coming from good intentions and saying, listen to yourself, be empowered and all that sort of stuff. And then, but then if you take that to the extreme, it is being emotionally captured and having your emotions controlled by you. But at the same time, I think so many people see that extreme and say, this is so bad, and then go into the opposite extreme, which is just as bad in a lot of ways, right? So I think that, So I think I kind of wanted to talk about more from your perspective as somebody who is very subconscious driven, the ESFP entertainer personality, and those also like with similar sort of temperaments where it's very much about being in the present moment and having that intuition of around you, what do the people around you need from you, and having those spontaneous creative ideas that are more about the aesthetic and tangible things around you. That's something that's so hard to know how to apply in a world like today's, because so many things are just about, it's like what do people think of as work, right? It's like the opposite of that, right? And so I think that a lot of people with your sorts of strengths can feel as though they need to suppress themselves in a way that we've noticed they cannot, in the sense that
it's really hard. If you have like just for context, if you know about like the Myers-Briggs personality test, we got into personality tests like years,
a long time ago.
But I've generally been for a while now the entertainer personality.
And this, when we talk about personalities, it's more like, I think it's really helpful because it's just a mental model for understanding different human beings. And mostly what I like about it is that you get a vocabulary about how to describe yourself, because obviously it's not 100% correct. No mental models are.
I'm a completely different person than I was a year ago. But I still test as the same thing because it's looking for like what's like the base desires.
Well, certain like natural tendencies in certain situations. And so of course you can override those natural tendencies. It's going to play out in different situations based off of who you are. But
there are a few things like main thing is probably like knowing how to like, well, I don't want to like come in with like I know the solution, because like I'm still working on these things. And like figuring out like, okay, how do you make the difference between emotional impulse and just like following that versus listening to that, because in the moment it's very unclear. You're naturally going to be driven to do the things you just naturally wanted to do.
Right.
I think one thing that can really help is like actually having someone to, talk to, and like, cause like I like talking to Sume. I think that should be pretty obvious by now. So like I'll talk to you of like trying to actually talk about my emotions and like say, this is something I want to do. And if I say it out loud, it's pretty obvious what I should do. Because like I just feel like I feel a deep need right now to go to Giant and get myself a donut. In my head, it can seem perfectly valid.
Right.
But then when I'm talking to you, it's like, okay, let's discuss this.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with in terms of being able to express your emotions out loud as kind of a necessary way for you to be able to understand them with some sort of more objective basis, versus in your head it can just be very confusing as to what does this actually mean and what should I actually do. But I think that part of what we wanted to discuss is that for you, emotional suppression or subconscious suppression was something that was not just like a permanent state. It was more like okay, I'm going to put my head down, I'm going to do this, and then it would come out in other ways.
Yeah.
Right. And that was something that I think was a pattern that I think a lot of people who are more subconscious dominant but feel as though that channeling that side of them isn't valid would experience the same sort of pattern that you were going through.
Yeah, you'll have your like escape place where it's a sanctuary. It actually changes with it. I've definitely, this has been a repeated thing throughout my life where I'll have like this place that I go to whenever I'm not putting my head down and trying to make myself do something.
Right.
So sometimes it would be, when I was 8, Legos. Just in my room, Legos.
Yeah.
Listening to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I'm still listening to Harry Potter, but then it changes something. It becomes sewing, and then it'll become crafts, and then it'll become...
And you are also finding ways of channeling it into very wholesome activity.
That's true.
Whereas like one thing that, you'll mention sometimes in terms of like the ESFP, the stereotype of your personality is like being a shopaholic and like impulse buying and that sort of thing. And I think that it makes a lot of sense that for somebody who is subconscious driven, if you think that in order for you to be a constructive human being in today's world, you have to suppress that side of it. But then if you're subconscious dominant, you can't suppress that forever.
It's just gonna come out.
And it's just gonna come out, and it's not because you're not actually creating an understanding and an alignment. You're creating a suppression that's going to come out in some ways.
And I think it's not just like you have this monster inside of you that wants to just like
sabotage your life.
That just wants to sabotage your life, and that sometimes it has to take over.
Right.
And there's just like, you can channel it, and it's actually really cool when when your goals are aligned and you're doing something that you feel is something you really want to do.
Yeah.
And then it also makes sense. Like, I'm sure sometimes I'm sure like the subconscious driven people, they've experienced this at least once, where they have some kind of, maybe it's like an idea for a novel or
right,
something. And it's like, wow, I'm working on this, and I'm so motivated, and I'm so inspired to do this. And then that's like really cool. It's great.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something every day where you feel like this is just something I completely don't want to do, or maybe it's just not the most exciting thing.
You can feel like you're two different people in some sense of like, oh, it's me when I'm like trying to like put my head down and like and like channel this more conscious side of me, and then I'm letting myself use that subconscious, and then there's not able to find any way to integrate those two, right? And I think that can be the really challenging part of it.
I just remembered I went through a phase where I was just making focus projects. For a while, I was just doing it on focus because I'm like, I need this time where I'm just putting my head down to be all the time. So how do I do that? And for a while, I would go in my closet and I'd work in the dark on my laptop because it would just block out everything else.
That.
And I was like, wow, this is so cool.
I can just be a hermit in the dark and hate my life. It's like, and I think that for a lot of people, they think, oh, this is the solution, right? I can just be a robot all the time. And especially you can see like the mindset that we have in terms of at school and at work and all those sorts of things. It is like, be a robot. Right. And I think
it can feel like you're fighting because it's like, why can't all the time I can be a robot?
Right.
Why can't I just be a robot all the time? Why can't I just be like this all the time? Why do I feel like I need to go in my room and listen to Harry Potter while doing crafts? And I think that that's something where it's also a really damaging environment in the sense that for people that are more subconscious driven, it's really hard to see what your strengths are and how they can actually be helpful, because you can just think, oh, this side of me just makes me want to impulse buy, this side of me just sucks, right? And just to think that this is only a weakness when it's not. It's your most powerful strength. But you never get to see how it can actually work for you. If you're suppressing it.
Yeah, if you're suppressing it. And if you also don't find the environments in which it can actually work for you, right? Because it's not going to be the traditional mindset of like doing some like routine task that's already predefined, right? That's not how that more creative, aesthetic and in the moment, feeling the people around you and seeing what they need and all those things come together to produce something that's magical, and I see that from you. I'm like, how did you do that? It's something you can't explain, and that's what makes it so difficult.
See that? Can you give me an example? No,
well, it's like the speech that you wrote when you got your black belt at Taekwondo. It was like, wow, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Right? And it was just something.
I'm so cool.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's what happens when you're really motivated to do something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that part of it is that if you think about the environment that we used to live in, people like you and people with that sort of that strength would make everybody stronger. You think about in an environment where all you're trying to do is survive, and you have such a clear understanding of what to do, right? Of course you're not suppressing your subconscious, because nobody did that before. There was no reason to.
There's nothing to suppress,
Yeah.
you're in the environment that you evolved
to be in, right?
To be in.
And the kinds of people who are like you and don't, like are living through that more subconscious dominant perspective, you're going to be so aware of certain things that other people won't be. When we were in Iowa, one of our cousins got lost, and you knew that he was in the elevator somehow because you have that sort of like
toddler cousin. He's like
3 or 4,
and then I saved the day. Because basically we were doing stuff, and then there was an elevator,
and you just wandered
into
the elevator. And then
he just wandered in when it opened up.
Yeah.
And then, well, yeah, I did hear.
Yeah, and
it felt very good to be the hero. And early on the walk, sometimes it brings my things to things that aren't as important. Like earlier on the walk, I was like, "Look at those flowers!"
Right?
Like, yup. Kept on walking.
Right. But I think that part of it is that because the subconscious is a million times more powerful, it's so much harder to draw a sort of causal relationship of this happened and I noticed this, and because of that, right? It's like a lot more, just kind of, we're like, It's much harder to understand. So it's much harder to appreciate and actually see, this is a strength, right? Because most people could think, it's just a coincidence that, like, you heard him and we didn't. Oh, great job, But then to draw the connection between that and the sort of intuition that comes from that more spatial awareness versus, like, I'm just, like, living in my head. I'm like, what flowers? Where am I? It's like, right, and that sort of thing is something that is much harder to understand, so it's much harder to appreciate. So of course it's much harder to learn how to channel in today's environment.
Yeah. Right? Well, now we don't have to look out for tigers and stuff. And like,
right.
Knowing if the berry was a slightly different color, that was important before because it might have been poisonous.
Right.
But now we're not scavenging for berries and looking out for tigers and stuff like that. So it can be hard. Like, how do I harness this, and how do I actually use this? This motivation and this inspiration and to do these things.
Yeah, and I think part of what we've been kind of going through a process of is that to appreciate your subconscious is not to be controlled by it, but it is to know that the sorts of emotions and intuitions and things that come up from that is driven by your subconscious part of the brain is something that is valid and that should be prioritized, but you want to know how, right? Because it's not just, I have this emotion, let me go just do whatever I feel like doing, right? It's this emotion was brought to me for a reason, and I need to understand that reason before I dismiss it or think, what should I do because of it?
And sometimes it's very clear, like, sometimes it's very clear. Like, sometimes it's just animal impulses.
Right. And then it's just, okay, I probably shouldn't do this. And maybe I should change my environment or change what I'm doing over here.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have, like, maybe I should turn off the notifications on one of my social media apps if it's constantly bringing to my attention. That's when you can actually do things that it's very easy because you know where it's coming from. Yeah. But then other times, like, sometimes maybe with a relationship, you're feeling off when you talk to them, and then maybe it's because they're confronting you about something, a convenient belief that you have,
and you should actually pay attention, and you should be able to go through that emotional struggle. But sometimes it's like, hey, there's a reason why I'm feeling uncomfortable about this person. I need to understand why, and that's something that is incredibly important, because that's part of what we've been thinking, in our podcast on trust, is that it's like, okay, you can have this whole logical framework of who this person is, and everything I was talking about was very conscious dominant in terms of you have a mental model of this person, that sort of thing. And then for you, it's like, you're very attuned as to here, this person makes me feel a certain way, and that is very important, and we've experienced times in which it was like, oh yeah, Isla, you were right to be like a little bit concerned about that. And
even if you can't, like, because the subconscious is so powerful and huge, and like it's taking in all of the different signals and stuff like that, then your conscious sometimes can't pick up. It's like sometimes people, when they're feeling overwhelmed, they have this feeling and they have this gut feeling, but sometimes they don't know where it's coming from, and sometimes it ends up being right. And so it's like, actually trying to think through that and be aware of that and try and like process that. I think talking to someone else is very good. Writing about it is very good. Like, where is this actually coming from? And then it can make things very clear, and that's super helpful. Because it'll pick up on things that you weren't aware of.
And I think that the main thing I think that is really important is that I think it's very hard for people who have this form of strength to have a lot of confidence, because it's really hard to see, oh, wow, I'm so powerful in this way, because it's really hard to perceive that sort of power and how it can be applied.
Especially if you're just being a shopaholic or something.
Like
and my shopaholic power is so powerful.
Right. And so I think it's very easy for people to either think, oh, this is just who I am, and I just need to like be, content with it, instead of seeing there's so many ways in which this could be channeled and the potential that brings, as well as it's so easy for people to just write it off and say, oh, this is just weakness and this is just being controlled. And I think that that's very damaging in terms of not actually being an accurate form of understanding of where that actually comes from, because we are in such a different environment than which we evolved, which means that we do need to do some work in terms of understanding, what is the environment that we need and what is the understanding that we need in order for us to be most effective. Right? But that should never result in I just suck because of this. It's like these emotions and these desires are coming from somewhere, and to make sure that we can understand where it's coming from before we jump to assumptions about what we should be doing, right? Because our minds are incredibly powerful. And I think that it's important for us to respect that we don't always understand how it works and how it's helping us, right? But that we can build that understanding to know how we can make it most effective.
And I think a couple of steps for that is just listening to your subconscious. Like, you don't need to act on it, but just being like, okay, I feel this way. And then don't just rely on willpower, because you have limited amounts of willpower. You can't just force yourself into everything because you think it's the right thing to do. Like, maybe you want to be healthier and you want to be stronger. Maybe the best solution isn't going to the gym every day. Maybe it's going to the gym sometimes, and then other times doing jump rope in your house, or like figuring out something that would be really fun to do, that you actually really enjoy doing, that can do, instead of just like putting people be fit by going to the gym,
right?
And so I need to go to the gym, and if I don't feel like it, then I just need to force myself into it. Maybe have a yoga mat at home that you can just roll out and do something
and
there.
Maybe think, maybe your body is telling you that you should rest for a good reason. It's like we've spent...
If you can barely get out of bed because you're so sore,
maybe don't go to the gym.
Maybe don't go to the gym that day, Maybe nourish yourself with some yummy, healthy food,
Right.
Like, you don't need to just give in to things and then force yourself and give in to things like it's something that you're fighting. You can integrate things that you actually enjoy.